allow me to call upon Nompilo Simanje, Africa Advocacy and Partnerships Lead, International Press Institute. She's an expert on the intersection of technology and the law and human rights. So I heard there were concerns about AI, and people were talking about regulation and policy and all that. So yeah, let's hear from Nompilo. Maybe she will touch on that as well, but she'll be talking about the impact of cybersecurity laws in Zimbabwe on journalists. Yeah, remember, guys, as we approach the end of today's program, this is the second day of the conference on the future journalism education in Zimbabwe. And the theme of the conference is empowering African AI, enhancing journalism excellence in the digital era. And this conference is brought to you by DW Academy, together with Namibia Media Trust, as well as MISA Malawi, the Media Institute of Southern Africa, Malawi, and CITE, Center for Innovation and Technology. So yeah, I see Nompilo is here. Over to you, Nompilo.
Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you very much for having me. I had some notes that I had written in my laptop, but I realized being not gifted height-wise, if I open it, you might not end up seeing my face. But I'm glad to be joining everyone this afternoon. And of course, thanks to CITE, DW Academy, MISA Malawi, and Namibia Media Trust for consistently hosting this conference. And I was asked to speak particularly on impact of cybersecurity laws in Zimbabwe and how they impact journalists. And I mean, as was rightfully mentioned, I work with an international organization. So, every time you think about legislation and impact, you always think about negative impacts. But I think we'll try and explore what is provided for in the laws and, of course, what we need to take into account. I also note that I am the last presenter for the day. And it's one of two things. One being that you are too tired and you won't ask me too many questions and difficult questions. But also that I might be the last person that you remember from this conference. So let's see how it goes. But thank you for having me. You can go ahead and move the next slide. You might not be able to keep up with me, but let's just keep them rolling. I will try and share as much as I can in the time frame that we have. And I realize that you may not see what's there, but I work for the International Press Institute based in Vienna. We are a membership organization with members in about 100 countries, including in Zimbabwe, and I lead our Africa work, where we are mainly looking at monitoring press freedom threats and violations in the region, but also supporting advocacy work. And we also have a component that we will be rolling out. We have done that in other regions, and we intend to start rolling it out in the region in Africa, focusing on disinformation, and particularly also gender disinformation, targeting female journalists, and broadly also online threats against journalists in the region. As we do our work, we also prioritize countries that have elections. So we've been quite vested in what has been happening in Nigeria, in Zimbabwe, in Sierra Leone, in Eswatini. And in the next few months, also, we are looking at what's happening next week in Liberia and also in the DRC. But also we have journalists that are in countries that have conflict, for example, Mozambique, Sudan. There have been lots of protests in Kenya, Senegal. So we try to also do some work in all those countries. And as I think about cybersecurity laws, I'd want to highlight that Zimbabwe and the experience of journalists in Zimbabwe might also be similar actually to what other journalists have been experiencing in other countries as a result of their cybersecurity laws in countries like Nigeria, but also even in Zambia, in Lesotho, they're also discussing a cybersecurity law, and there have been all these conversations about how these laws will impact the media. And it's a very timely and relevant conversation, particularly also seeing how today we have been focusing on the cyberspace, how we've been focusing on digital tools, which serves to show that it's a very important conversation that we should be having, particularly around cybersecurity and the legal frameworks around that. I was speaking with Prof. Ndlovu earlier and I was telling him, while other people might say I'm a lawyer, I'll just tell you I went to law school because I have not worked or identified as a lawyer in a very long time. But it's not a bad thing. I'm not complaining. Yeah, maybe just to look at Zimbabwe, I'll start off by saying, maybe answering the question, why cybersecurity laws? These laws are quite relevant and important, like I said, but also just recently I did this article which focused on DDoS attacks that have been targeting media outlets in the region in Africa. And, you know, some of our members like Daily Maverick were targeted by a DDoS attack in August. Somalia Journalist Syndicate was targeted by a DDoS attack. Our organization did a report on DDoS attacks targeting media outlets in Hungary, and we were also targeted as a result of that statement. For about 2 weeks, we're also battling a DDoS attack, just to show also some of the threats that come with the online space and why it's important to have legal and policy frameworks around that. And but when you think about free expression and media freedom in the region, there's one survey which was done sometime in 2022, I think, and I can't remember whether it was specific to Zimbabwe or some other country in the region, but the question was, who poses the biggest threat to the enjoyment of the right to freedom of expression and media freedom in your country? And the biggest stakeholder that was mentioned was the government, which was at 66.7%. And I think it is also as a result of some of the pieces of legislation that our governments are putting forward, which undermine fundamental rights. But having said that, you'll find that government approaches to cybersecurity laws actually have been from the perspective that these laws are relevant, these laws are important. So when the Zambians passed their cyber and data protection law, I think that was sometime in 2021, at a time when the now former president Edgar Lungu was in power, he said, this law is there to purely protect citizens from abuse by people who feel they can do or say whatever they want using the veil of the cyberspace. This law is aimed at protecting all Zambians, including those who are against it. So when governments think about cybersecurity laws, you know, the perspective is that, you know, this is a necessary law. We need this law, you know, to address social media abuse. We need this law to address fake news. We need this law to promote national security. But what I will demonstrate in the next few minutes is that when these laws are actually being implemented, and with the Zimbabwean scenario, you will see that they're actually also in some way undermining media freedom and free expression. When you think about cyber laws, there are so many of them. We have a Cyber and Data Protection Act that was enacted sometime in December 2021. We have an Interception of Communications Act. It's an old law from 2007. We also have our Criminal Law Codification and Reform Act, which was also amended through the Cyber and Data Protection Act, but it's also 2007 thereabouts law. It has been amended subsequently over time. And when you look at the Cyber and Data Protection Act, I think one of the aspects is that it has data protection frameworks. You know, a duty of care with regards to the collecting, processing, transmission, and storage of data. And the media does that quite a lot. The media collects, you know, data quite a lot, personally identifying information even. I remember at one time, there was this prominent man, I don't remember his name, but he was, there was a fire in his apartment. His apartment is opposite the State House. There was a fire. And I remember Newsworks did an article where they spoke up, where they highlighted an interview that they'd done with one of the security guards at the apartments. And they even mentioned her name, a home address, and the ID number. And I was just wondering how that is relevant to the article. You know, you interview a security guard at a complex, at a gated community, and then you put their home address and their ID. It didn't make sense to me at the time, but, you know, there's a duty of care to journalists because you're collecting personal data. And so when you're collecting all this data, you also need to make sure that you use the data for the purposes that it was collected. So I see anyone maybe doing an interview, maybe Zenzele, he interviews me, maybe I give him my home address, and then he rocks up one weekend, maybe, oh, let's do drinks. I gave him my home address for purposes of the interview or for some journalistic collaboration. If he starts using that to visit me unannounced, that is outside the purposes, right? So there is some level of duty of care, which I think is expected. But again, there's always this interplay between media freedom and the right to privacy. So when you're having all this conversation around AI and stuff like that, you know, those are some of the things that I think about. How are we balancing the use of digital technologies and AI tools with the right to privacy? How do we balance our right as journalists to exercise media freedom with the rights of the data subjects and the people that we interact with and their right to privacy? So one thing also that I did as part of this fellowship called the Open Internet for Democracy Leaders Program was to do an article around use of drone technologies by the media. And there are two cases actually that I highlighted, one being a case in Uganda where a journalist used his drone to cover an event. I think it was a church event or something, and then he was arrested for that. But also that recently in Zimbabwe, one journalist also was arrested for using a drone. He was being accused that the drone is not licensed, but the complaint was filed by a resident in the area that he was using the drone. They're the ones who filed the complaint. They said, you know, this drone was invading our privacy. This was unlawful entry to our premises. So whenever I think about uses of technology in the digital landscape, I always think about the need for the media to balance media freedom and the right to privacy. So those are some of the things to think about from the perspective of our cyber and data protection law. But there's also this provision on cyberbullying and harassment you know, I've always been thinking about, and I've seen it, you know, actually impacting the media. And I wanted to flag that, you know, when this law was being drafted, I contributed to the process quite a lot in my previous portfolio as the Legal and ICT Police Officer at MISA. And, you know, when we looked at the provision at the time, it made so much sense. You know, there's gendered, online gender-based violence. There are so many experiences about how the online space is not safe for marginalized groups. You know, we did a project with DW Academy at the time on digital rights literacy, and digital inclusion was one of the issues we're always speaking about. And, you know, having a policy framework that speaks about cyberbullying and harassment made so much sense. And I think it still makes sense, but I just want to demonstrate how this has played out as far as content creation and the media is concerned, and you decide on your own how it has been impacting the media. So when you look at the provision on cyberbullying and harassment, the law is saying that any person who unlawfully and intentionally uses a computer and information system to send a message to another person or to post any material, you know, with the intent to coerce, to intimidate, to harass, to threaten, to bully, to cause substantial emotional distress, to degrade, to humiliate, to demean, all that would amount to cyberbullying and harassment. And I remember speaking to one journalist on Twitter, and I told him, you know, telling someone in an intellectual debate, telling someone to go and bath actually amounts to cyberbullying. And they were not happy with that, but equally his fans were not happy. You know, I have dreadlocks. They told me, go and get your hair done, go to the salon and stuff. I mean, I didn't think my locks are bad, but yeah, maybe I need to go to the salon. But I mean, all this was done to demean me as a person who was speaking out against certain conduct, but also in an intellectual conversation, telling another person to go and bath was a way of trying to humiliate them and demean them. And I think that it would have qualified actually, or it still qualifies under the definition of cyberbullying and harassment, right? So, I mean, it's a progressive provision. And we need, you know, online spaces to be safe for everyone, you know, fair and fine. Now let's move on to this case study. There's a case of a person called David Kanduna. I understand he's an actor in one of these popular series on ZBC. You know, like Zenzele, I also don't interact with our local content on TV as often. So I'm not aware of the series, but I understand, you know, there's this person, this is a person who was not a journalist, but it will demonstrate what I want to highlight. So what happened is that it was last year in May at one of the local universities, and there was a soccer match at the university, and police were deployed, you know, to be at the grounds to provide security during the match. And then there were skirmishes, right? I guess it's like what happens at DBT's soccer matches where you'll be supporting Highlanders and there's Dynamos. You know, there's a skirmish there, and then the police officer was mocked, he was jeered at. Maybe it's exactly like what happened recently. there's jeering of the between the police officers and the fans. And, the police officer was lifted and people were running with him while he was lifted in the air. And then this gentleman recorded what was happening. He shared it on WhatsApp, and then he shared it also on TikTok. The video was trending. And in the end, he was arrested and charged with cyberbullying. He was also convicted and ordered to pay a fine, right? So I'm trying to imagine if this was a journalist. This is a journalist. You see a skirmish at the Highlanders versus Dynamo's game. You record it. It trends. If a report is filed, a complaint is filed, and you are charged with cyberbullying and harassment. Do we think it was an appropriate application of the law? Do we think if this gentleman was a journalist, the circumstances would have been different? We have citizen journalists, we have community champions that are equally contributing to the information ecosystem. So do we think this conviction was justified? Do we think this enforcement of the law was justified? When I looked at the case, I thought if it was a journalist, it would have definitely been undermining media freedom. But also I think definitely it undermines content creation in the region, because I mean, people are taking videos and sharing them all the time. It's part of news, actually. There's a soccer match at a university. There's a fallout between the students maybe and the police. You record it and you disseminate. I think it's relevant information. I think it's public interest information to know what happened. And I don't think a person should be charged with cyberbullying for doing that. And also my understanding of cyberbullying, seeing that this was an event that happened offline and then it was shared online, I think I was just also struggling to really correlate to what extent, where exactly did cyberbullying start? Was it the sharing of the video, or was it maybe the comments that were made after the video was shared? Where exactly did the cyberbullying start? I mean, it's a legal and academic argument, but this is just one case to demonstrate how, while on the face of it, a provision might seem progressive, so many of the cyber and data protection laws might seem progressive, but when it comes to the actual implementation and enforcement of the laws, that is where you see the actual impact on fundamental rights. Then I want to move on to another case as well. This was sometime also last year in October. There was a journalist from Lupane who saw a woman. So apparently this woman works for an international, for an organization. I'm not sure if it's international, but it's an organization that protects women and girls' rights. So this guy is there in Lupane. He sees this woman and their mother assaulting a young girl, a teenager. And I can tell you, I think it was involving a man. I'm not sure. Please don't spread the information. It will be disinformation. This is just making presumptions. This woman and the mother gangs up and assaults a teenager. This journalist in Lupane sees it happening and he records what is happening. And I mean, obviously now people ask, should you have intervened and rescued the teenager instead of recording? That's a separate conversation. But what happened is he recorded, this teenager being assaulted, and he posted this video on Facebook. And this woman filed a complaint, and he was charged with cyberbullying and harassment. I remember at the time MISA assisted with deployment of a lawyer. The lawyer really helped him so much. The case was eventually not prosecuted, but I remember he was so scared. He would message me almost on a daily basis. Good morning, ma'am. I've not received any feedback about that case. And I just told him, hang tight. If the police are ready to prosecute, they'll let you know. But he was living in so much fear. He didn't know what was going to happen. Now that a complaint has been filed and the police are charging him. But yeah, this is what happens also in some of the cases where genuine journalistic work is undermined through the use of provisions that you think are also quite progressive. And then fast forward to this year. Al Jazeera Gold Mafia documentary comes out. Journalists are reporting on it, Zim Live, Newswalks, everyone is all over the documentary. And then this Twitter user called Tinoyedza Zimwe, who is believed to also be a high-profile government official, then started threatening the media, threatening journalists, saying, you know, we don't care whether you are reporting on the Al Jazeera documentary, our jail is still open, we still have space in our prisons, you know, making all these threats on journalists that were reporting on this. And I remember Zuj, Maz, and Zinef filing a petition before Parliament. I mean, I know Zuj and Zinef are also part of Maz, so we can just say Maz and partners or Maz members. Filed a petition to the Speaker of Parliament to investigate cases of cyberbullying and harassment of journalists. And, you know, they highlighted that there's been repeated threats to the media by this Twitter user. And they argued also that such threats and harassment have a chilling effect on free expression and media freedom. So we switched the scenarios, and to some extent we can argue also that the provision on cyberbullying and harassment can be relied on by the media too, where some form of threats and harassment are being done to journalists online. So possibly we can also rely on such a provision as the media, you know, to argue for online safety, to argue for media freedom and free expression. So like I said, I'm not giving you an answer. I want all of you, if there's a feedback survey, to then give feedback to say, okay, so based on what we have discussed, how do you think the law is impacting the media, right? I have my own perceptions, but I'm not going to be shoving them down your throats. Now, I want to move on to another provision on transmitting false data messages intending to cause harm. What you will see is that false news has been regulated, not only in Zimbabwe, in so many other countries in the region. And lately, we've also seen not only false news in print and stuff, but also even online being regulated. But what I'll tell you is that in terms of our human rights systems, laws that criminalize the publishing of falsehoods are unconstitutional. They're an unjustifiable and unlawful restriction to media freedom and free expression. As IPI, we produced a toolkit sometime last month, two toolkits actually, one which was a Pan-African one and another one which was focusing on Zimbabwe, highlighting the regional, international, and national frameworks that protect media freedom and access to information in Africa. And we do highlight even case law, you know, from the African Commission, from the African Court, which speak about criminalization of falsehoods. So fast forward to 2021, we also see our Cyber and Data Protection Act criminalizing the transmission of false data messages. And when you look at this provision, you actually see that what it did was to smuggle back criminal defamation. You know, it makes it unlawful to use a computer and information system to distribute data concerning an identified and identifiable person, knowing that information is false with intent to cause psychological or economic harm. For me, that is defamation. There is no need to criminalize it. We have a civil route for that. We have a civil mechanism to utilize for that. The criminalization of that has already been declared unconstitutional, even by our own court in Zimbabwe. But we saw it happening, you know, and being resuscitated in this provision. And how has that impacted the media? We have the case of one journalist, Hope Chizuzu. Sometime last year, Hope did some stories, you know, about, I think they related to, you know, sports, the board of Dynamo's football club, Zifa, and the likes. So he did some stories because he's a sports journalist. Of course, he did some stories around that. And, you know, members of the board for Dynamo's football club filed complaints against him. And they were also complaining that as a result of his story, he caused confusion in Zimbabwe's football by attacking the SRC and the Zifa executive. And the police confiscated his phone and iPad as evidence. But at the time, also when I speak to him, and also I think from what I understand, the matter is still at pre-trial stage. So what am I trying to demonstrate with Hope's case? Yeah, I mean, a journalist does a story, someone is unhappy with the story, and they file a complaint that, you know, it's false. Whether it's false or it's true will obviously be determined in the court of law, but there is an impact that it does to the journalist. for Hope Chuzuzu, his phone and iPad were confiscated. This could also potentially mean surveillance of his devices. This could also potentially mean he's unable to do his work. Maybe he was using his iPad to record videos and stuff like that. He was using his iPad for journalistic work. Now also one of his journalistic equipments in court, since we're in the digital age, even a phone can be journalistic equipment. Now his journalistic equipment has been confiscated. Maybe as they are trying to access the evidence, they'll also get confidential information relating to his journalistic sources. So there's a whole range of various ways in which this can impact media freedom and impact the journalist. But yeah, I'll move on also to speak about the case of Wisdom Mudzungairi and Desmond Chingarande. My understanding of their case at the time was that they were doing purely court reporting. They reported about this legal squabble that was ongoing relating to Glen Forest Memorial Park. You know, in Zimbabwe and issues around land and land barons, there are always lots of, cases going in the courts. But also it seems with this case, it involved also high profile government people. They did court reporting on this legal battle, and they found themselves also being arrested and being charged for publishing false data messages. The case was eventually not prosecuted, but what it can do also is even promote self-censorship amongst the journalists. You're like, if a case, even if it's court reporting, if it involves certain people or certain public officials, I'm not taking it on, right? So these are some of the challenges, I think, which we have seen in terms of our cybersecurity laws. And I think just to wrap up in terms of way forward, that survey I mentioned earlier also had another question: who is the most important ally to improve the situation towards media freedom and free expression? And one of the biggest people was civil society. I work with civil society a lot, and I think there's a potential for meaningful collaboration between the media and civil society. When I was speaking with Prof earlier and we're talking about our work, I actually realized that as part of the current project, we have not done any collaboration with the academia, but I think all of us can be allies for the media to address all these challenges that are presented by these laws, and I'll demonstrate how we can do that going forward. But I think in terms of key questions to inform legislation, I think civil society can help the legislature in terms of ensuring that we promote the safe use of the internet and social media platforms in a technology-driven and technology-dependent society. We can ensure that we balance criminalization of cyber-related offenses. Remember, I mentioned DDoS attacks earlier. Definitely the perpetrators need to be prosecuted. There are so many cases where media infrastructure is undermined, by various means, hacking included. We definitely need to have some cyber-related crimes criminalized, but at the same time, we need to make sure that we strike a balance between that criminalization and the protection of fundamental rights. We need to think about how, when we develop these cybersecurity laws, in their enforcement, they do not promote unlawful surveillance. But at the same time, when governments think about national security, they think about the actual security of the citizens and the users, media outlets being included also on the users of the online space. And so in terms of that, I think the media, civil society is a good opportunity to argue for human-centric approach, for multi-stakeholder approach, for holistic approach, for mainstreaming of human rights in legislation. And as the media, I think we need to continue monitoring the environment and reporting on the implementation of these laws, particularly where we see an interplay between the implementation of the laws and potential undermining of fundamental rights. But also, I think one of the things that civil society can push for is an amendment to the data protection aspect to include exceptions to journalistic privilege. The way journalists handle or process data should not be legislated in the same way that other data controllers and processors like your telecoms operators handle and process data. I understand I'm out of time, so let me just wrap up on my recommendations. Actually, I'm left with three, one being strategic litigation. Zenzele has been one of the key partners for civil society in public interest litigation. So I think we can have the media also stepping up and being willing to challenge some provisions that we feel are unconstitutional. But yeah, I think in the end as well, we need to ensure that these cybersecurity laws are used for the safety of the media and individual journalists, as well as the protection of their infrastructure. And I will end here. And of course, I will blame SITE for giving me very little time when I had lots of things to say. But thank you very much, colleagues. I totally appreciate having this opportunity. And of course, I remain available for any further discussions.
Well, thank you so much, Nompilo, for that presentation. And I just have two contributions, a comment and some questions here. And from Moses Chitsulu, governments across Southern Africa are using / abusing cybersecurity narrative to punish citizens with free speech restricting laws. These cybersecurity laws are usually used against critical voices. And then Anderson Fumulani says, was the police officer alone providing security at a crowded ground? What if other police officers joined to help their colleague and the skirmishes turned ugly? Would that still be considered cyberbullying? If it was recorded, would the bullying be directed at the police or the crowd?
Thank you very much. I took note of Moses's comment. I didn't see any question there, so just to agree with him that indeed cybersecurity laws are being used across the region actually to undermine critical voices. I've seen that actually even in other countries like Somalia, which have been quite high-profile countries. And there's actually a journalist who has been in detention since August 17. He has not even been charged. He has not been, brought before the court. So yeah, we are seeing critical voices being undermined, independent media being undermined, not only in Zimbabwe, but across the region through the use of cyber laws. And I think as a region, we should utilize the existing frameworks, to challenge these laws, not only at national level, but also at regional level, and utilize even the AU and UN systems to ensure that we challenge all these provisions and that they are repealed. And then with regards to the scenario involving the police, actually, I would presume that there were other police officers. I don't think it was one police officer, but definitely the case itself focused on this particular police officer who was, jeered at and carried by the crowd and all that skirmish that happened. And I think what I would highlight in terms of the cyberbullying itself is that it seems that it was the police officer who filed the complaint, or at least it was the state of its own volition that prosecuted this person who had, published this video, or maybe it was a complaint that was made by someone else, but at the end of the day, the complaint was that this police officer was cyberbullied, and the court also seemed to agree with the complainants in that case. And but obviously, again, coming back to your question, that was it the crowd or the police that was cyberbullied? I mean, the video obviously included also members of the public. So I'm trying to also get to a point where I appreciate and trying to imagine if any member of the public had also made a complaint that their face had been in this video or that they had been recorded in this video, if the outcome had been the same, if they were also a complainant. But I think these are the challenges that we also face with regards to enforcement of cyber-related offenses, or offenses that are not exactly cyber related or originating from the cyber space, but that end up also being circulated on the cyberspace, that sometimes in the enforcement of some of these provisions or in the regulation of that conduct, we can see a very thin line where fundamental rights are also being undermined. And I think what I would want to highlight also as a recommendation, which I didn't get to say, is that I think there's a need to also engage the police in terms of human rights-based policing. The police need to understand some of the objectives behind some legislation, and also how some manner of enforcing piece of legislation can also result in fundamental rights. Because I think if we were to bring together the judiciary, the police, the prosecution to discuss some of these cases, I don't think they would still have the same perspectives in terms of whether or not an offense was committed. So I think we need to also start engaging some of these stakeholders, using already the cases that have been prosecuted as case studies to say, okay, let's really go through this case, maybe even go to the clerk of court and request for the documents in that way submitted as part of the court process to say, in all fairness, or taking all facts and circumstances of the case into account, do we think an offense was committed? Do we think this enforcement was not undermining fundamental rights? So I think there's an opportunity as well to think around that. But yeah, thank you very much for the questions. I hope I managed to answer successfully.
Well, thank you so much, Nompilo. And we've come to the end of our second day of the conference. And for now, I will hand over to Peter D, the Program Director, Namibia, Southern Africa, W Academy. And also to the participants here, we are going to do a survey. The link is going to be sent to you and also shown on the screen so that you get to go on the link and, share your views on the conference today, your comments and your experiences there. But yeah, for now, over to you, Peter.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I hope you can see the screen. We also shared the link in the WhatsApp group, and let me also share it here in the chat if I can find it. Oh, it's already shared. Joost already put it in the chat, so also if you don't want to punch in the code, then you just open the chat link. Can you see the screen? Okay, yes. So if you are on your mobile, you can go to menti.com and then the code is 56965723. But the link should get you there immediately, and if you want to push the thumbs up button on the lower right hand side, that would probably be helpful for us to know that you've arrived there. Oh wait, am I on the wrong slide? I think I'm on the wrong slide. Yeah, no, let's start with that one. Sorry for confusing everyone. First of all, a very, very big thank you to SIDE. This was a very energetic conference day, and I particularly liked the morning, the start with a very honest and straightforward discussion of what a news presenter made with AI can do and where the limits is, and I think we really got a really deep look into the nitty-gritty of that as well, the dangers, the risks, but also the different opinions around that from the audience and from the news team as well. Okay, so we're getting a couple of votes already. Maybe just to quickly recap what happened, we started looking at Alice with Zenzele explaining how they got to it, what they did, then looked at the with Professor Ndlovu at what the audience says about AI using. That was a very, very helpful insight from my point of view, because I mean, we know what we think in the newsroom, but to get an insight into what the people that use the content that we produce say is very, very important in order to do the right thing when it comes to the use of AI ethically as well. Then Professor Francis Longwa giving us a historic wide review of how we got where we are with AI now. And then we looked into TikTok with amazing and really impressive examples from what site does on TikTok to push their high quality journalism into the social networks where most of the youth are. And then the impact of cybersecurity laws in Zimbabwe with Nompilo. Great to see you again, Nompilo. Now we're here wrapping up the day full of energy. And I'm already looking forward to tomorrow, when we'll see what in Lilongwe has been done by Misa Malawi, looking at issues like training in vernacular languages, how is artificial intelligence being applied in the newsroom in Malawi, human-centered design and product development with our colleague Audrey Parmentier, and then obviously another look at journalism education for viable media. And then again, I'm still curious, Lulu, to see what the drawing comes up with. So we have a, well, maybe not clear winner, but we have a more or less clear picture. The impact of Alice was the top session today. So I'm gonna slide over. Your takeaways from today, just add your thoughts, your ideas of what you take away from the day. Being introduced to Alice, the AI presenter. I think my main takeaway is that having an AI presenter gives a productivity boost. What Zenzele explained, that you can actually have a lot more news that you otherwise would only have in text form, to push that out into video and audio form, and that can actually increase your reach and your production, your output. That was a good thought. Yeah, there's a lot coming in here around gender in AI is important, and gender stereotypes. We should learn to live with AI and utilize it. Yeah, like technology is neither bad or good or bad, nor is it neutral. We're still the boss as humans. AI and bias. Yes, the bias issue comes up since yesterday. What data sets are algorithms based on? Need to embrace technology as we continue thinking of using these technological tools to innovate. Yes, otherwise the dinosaurs will die out. AI is not a threat to journalists' job. TikTok is the new platform for information sharing. Okay, I'm gonna innovate or be extinct. They are the dinosaurs. Let's see if the AI in Mentimeter gives us a couple of clusters around these. Yeah. Gender, informative, innovate, and AI. And gender. Okay. So, how was the day? Just slide the little dots on the bars, whether it was fun, if you learned around inspiring ideas. If you met interesting people, particularly those in Bulawayo, I guess it seemed you had a very good atmosphere there. I saw lots of people laughing in the audience, connecting. The first votes, a lot of inspiring ideas, interesting people. And critical questions were asked. And last but not least, overall day 2 was really good, okay, or ouch. For me it was really good. I really enjoyed the day, a lot of energy, really nice to see how the discussions from yesterday flowed into today, and I'm really looking forward to see tomorrow what will happen in Lilongwe. Golden Matonga, who will do the welcome remarks in the morning at 9 o'clock. We'll meet here. And then we'll hear from Susio Chitete around journalism, education, and vernacular languages. Malik Mnela from iHub Online, Edith Kambalame, the Bureau Chief from Nations Publication, and Vincent Kumwenda will speak about artificial intelligence in the newsrooms in Malawi. Then Audrey Parmentier about human-centered design, Joseph Mwale, the Bureau Supervisor from Nations Publications, and Teresa Ndanga will speak about journalism education. And then we'll have a look finally at the graphic recording from Lulu Kitulolo, where you could see already the sketching that happened. And then we'll see the way forward and an official conference closing with all the partners.
Thank you, Namibia Media Trust, site, DW Academy, and MISA Malawi for this conference.